Good evening, everyone, and welcome to the final edition of American Scousers Fantasy Show. I am your host, Mateusz. I am here joined by the ever consistent Galley
What's up, man? How we doing, guys?
and the ever elusive Trevor.
I wouldn't say I'm elusive. I'd say I'm just in the shadows.
You're, I wanted to say that line, even though it made no sense because it's not like you don't come on the show. It's just that we don't invite you, and that's pretty much it. So I mean,
Well, with the way I bottled this last half of the season, it's probably with good reason.
it's not any worse than Arsenal. So I think you're fine there. It's because
It's probably on par.
there's levels. There's levels to it, right?
Yeah.
Well, we will go over the last week of the season here. Congratulate some of our winners that we've had in some of our leagues, and then we'll kind of just talk about our last weeks, what happened, and then we'll just go over the season a little bit, kind of talk about anyone who stood out to us, anyone who disappointed us. Kind of just a fun little overview of what's to come. So, let us first start by congratulating Mr. BJ. Mr. BJ is a newbie to the game here, but it did not show as he took down myself in the final. And what's most hurtful about all of that is that I transferred out Cody Gakpo, and it bit me in the ass so hard. I would have had the win, but I am privileged to have lost to BJ. I wouldn't have wanted to lose to anyone else. I would have been much more pissed had I lost to anyone else. So, BJ, congratulations. I see you're in here. As he says, greetings, gentlemen. It was my honor and privilege to face Mateusz for the ASL Contributors League Championship. Not too bad for an FPL newbie, though, right? Not too bad at all. BJ, congratulations. You definitely deserve it.
Yeah, I gave him one victory lap last week. That was one nice comment. That was enough. I'm happy for him. I knew he'd do well. It makes sense. He's good at numbers. He pays attention, and he played all year long, which is the first thing you have to do. You looked like you were in trouble from Jump Street, to be honest. The fact you pulled out the win against Paul last week was pretty shocking in my mind. So you were rolling on thin ice, and you know it for a while. So it got up to you finally.
We talked about all year how I just lucked out with some of the matchups, and this was the last week that I wish I wouldn't have lucked out on any other matchup. I wish it would have been this one, but so be it. It is what it is. Next year we'll have Trevor in this specific competition, so
we'll get knocked out in the first round.
Yeah, I mean that's just it's part of the lore. You can't face that. You can't go against that at this point. Wanted to move on here and wanted to go over quickly our overall league, where it was incredibly close. It was tooth and nail all the way to the very end, and we had Mr. Pep actually lose out at the final spin here. I'll pull that up right here for you guys. As we see, Guns and Nunez just pip him by 3 points.
I'm saluting the swirl.
After taking,
I know it's coming.
Oh, it's still loading.
I see it.
It's there. Okay. Well, Trevor, you gotta just wait for this roll.
I gotta stay. Oh, okay.
Yeah, you gotta stay. So, as we see, Guns and Nunez finishing in the top 11,000, taking a -8 to really go for it, and it paid off. I did the same thing. It didn't pay off, but it's nice to see it pay off for someone else. Gally, I know we talked about Pep and kind of having the. If you want to talk about bottling, Trevor, Pep is sort of the bottler here because for about 30 of the 38 game weeks, Gally, it felt like Pep had it in the bag. And then Guns and Nunez, like every once in a while, would kind of just come up right above him, but then he would come back down the next week. What do you think happened here? Was it just the captaincy choice? I think that's really what happened.
Yeah, I think it's the captaincy play. Obviously, Pep stuck with Holland. That's what I did and was a huge mistake. So Guns and Nunez made the move, obviously bringing in Kane, most likely that last match week, and also captain him. You can also see Ed Fernandez. So he had two high-scoring players right there. And then I think he just had an better overall, last 4 or 5 match weeks, really. It wasn't just the last match week. The last 4 or 5, he really got close.
Yeah, and this is a little look at their teams here to see how they set up. Guns and Nunez, he took a -8, bringing in Alvarez, Kane, and Trent, taking out Isak, Holland, and Trippier, and putting the armband on Kane, which ultimately is what gave him the win. Because if Pep puts the armband on Kane instead of Holland and vicing Salah, then we would have seen a different story here. We would see Pep on top. So unfortunately, these are the kind of decisions that make or break your year. And not to say it's a bad year, because finishing in the top 11,590 out of 11, 12 million people is still an astounding feat.
Hey, Harry Kane got somebody a trophy.
Yes, he did. So it might never be for himself, but at least he'll help someone here. I remember, or I saw this past week this crazy stat. I don't know if you guys saw it. Because Spurs were knocked out of Europe this year, they had the second longest streak of European play out of any team in the Premier League. And I thought that was absolutely shocking, considering how little they've actually achieved in Europe, given how consistently they've been in Europe.
Yeah.
So
it was one of those things where this team has a playoff streak that's 14 years, but they're a 7 seed every year.
Right. Exactly. Take a look here. I do apologize. I had everything set up, and then technology is always fun. So Alan is finally here with us tonight. Typically joins us on the Mondays, and from what I know, on the Mondays and the Monday nights. So it's nice to have you here, Alan. Thanks for joining us. We are just going over the season here. Let's kind of just briefly touch on, because I know Gally, you said you might have to dip out a little early. And I could put your team up there, and people can see how your team dipped out early as well, given how your week went. But tell me, how, looking back at the season, what is one thing that kind of stood out to you? Is there anything that you learned this season? I know you're the most veteran player out of anyone here at American Scouser. So after this, 9th or 10th year, however long you've been in it, was there something you learned this year that you will take moving forward?
Well, I mean, I think I've used different principles over the years, and obviously I've stayed pretty true to the fact that, hits kill ranks. Like, the more hits you take, I went back today, I took 7 total -4s throughout the year. I didn't take a single -8 this year. So 7 different match weeks, I voluntarily took a -4. I think only like 3 times do I think the actual multiple transfers actually netted a positive 4 points. So right there, you're talking about 20 points off the rip. If I had 20 points to my finish, I'm up 100,000 places, and I'm right around 168,000 in the world. So it's little things like that. The number one thing, though, which, I'll learn someday that I'll probably never apply, it's just about the captaincies. Like, you just really have to get it right. Like, you don't really have to get your lineups right. You don't really have to get transfers right if you get picking your captain right every week, which is why I think it was so easy for those years where Mo was just an automatic. You put him in your side and he was your captain every week. The other thing is I think that I've learned that you can ultimately play this game by just fleecing the machine. And that's, just starting the season with a really good squad, getting a high rank, and then just running the template down all the way through. And it can get really boring. So looking for different differentials, trying to figure out ways to make moves in the standings without, dropping so far out that you can't get back. I think that's the biggest thing. And I'm just really waiting for the rules to change, because this is one of the most boring FPL years that's ever happened. And I think they have to drastically make some major shakeups to the game in the next year or two. Or I just think we're just going to end up with, Holland, Kane, and a bunch of 4.5 mids.
Yeah. When you're looking at the top scorers of the year, let's bring that up so we can kind of see what we're looking at here. We've got Holland and Kane up front, and then we've got Mo, which is still, I mean, to me, it's crazy to think of. So because we kept talking about how much of a down year he had. Just in general, I think that the media talking about how much of a down year he had, fantasy being like, oh, Mo's not the same, but he's still the 3rd highest scorer. I understand he cost the most out of any player in the game, But if you're still getting 239 points from those 38 weeks, that's still quite a bit of return there. And just to run off of this point really quick, Alan, I am unfortunately upstairs in my house where there is no light source that is good enough. So I have paid the meter this month at least. We'll see what happens next month, but there won't be any show next month, so it won't matter. So, and Alan also asks, "Hey Trevor, where is the plane?"
It's still on the deck.
It's still on the deck. Okay. If it was on the deck here in Illinois, it would be dried out by now because it's been severely hot and really dry the last couple of days. I don't know how it's been for you guys, but it's not great out here.
No, it's not great here either.
Looking at some of these high scorers here, Trevor, is there one that stands out to you or one that you are shocked by? Is there anyone that you expected on this list that didn't make it? I know that's like 3 questions in one, so have fun.
Now, obviously, the one at the start of the year that a lot of people weren't super sold on was Ollie Watkins getting that far up and getting as many goals as he did for Villa in that stretch where he scored, I think, like 7 weeks in a row or something like that. It may be a sign of things to come with Unai Emery if he sticks around at Villa, but that's the biggest one I view as kind of out of nowhere, because his previous season at Villa, he was kind of, he either would get 2 in a week and then he'd have 4 weeks where he'd get 1 shot on goal. So I think the managerial change for him really was big. But past that, I think maybe Trippier being as high as he is was something, because just nobody expected Newcastle to keep as many clean sheets as they did, just because it was kind of a makeshift defense, if you really look at it. But they were able to kind of cobble everything together and keep it really tight in front of Pope, and Trippier got a bunch of stuff from set pieces and from the run of play. So those would be my 2.
And Raya is ahead of Allison because he scored more fantasy points this year. That's the answer. He just had a few more bonus points here and there for saves. Obviously, this is not a ranking of who is best in the league. It's just a matter of who scored the most fantasy points. Gally, looking at this list, is there a name that you see up here that you expect not to see up here next year?
Well, yeah, I think it's going to be a while before Ivan Toney finds his name down on the screens again.
Excluding the man who can't play for half the year.
Yeah, I mean, like, if you ask me that question, that's for sure. I don't know. I think they'll all probably be on there. I think they're all really good fantasy options. That's what makes them good players. You know, I think if there was a name on here that surprises me at the beginning of the year, if you had told me that Trent wouldn't be in the top 10 of all fantasy players, I'd tell you were crazy. So I think that's one. The one on there that like jumps out at me that like I was like, well, you know, that I knew, like, I had Martinelli in my side to start the season. So I picked up the $500,000 on his $1 million price raise, and, you know, I reaped the benefits of the hot start. So I think that if you told me something shocking about this 5 weeks into the season, it's that Gabriel Jesus' name's not on the screen, because he came out such gangbusters. And honestly, before he got hurt, it looked like the entire Arsenal attack was just designed for him, right? Like, completely. And you look at this, and like Trossard's ahead of him in total points for the year. And I know that includes what he got at Brighton. But it's
ahead of him.
Xhaka. I mean, it's just kind of craziness. But you know, when you look at this side, I don't think anything really jumps out at me too much, other than the fact that once again, it's usually teams from the top, players from the top 5 or 6 sides that score the most points. They get the biggest returns, and that's why it's always about like filling your team with 8 players from the top sides, and then figuring out how to fill in the rest of your roster. And you know, you got to make sure you have the 4 weeks of Eze, and the 5 weeks of Almiron, and the 4 weeks of Jacob Murphy, And, if you just make 3 transfers and you have those 3 midfielders for 17 weeks in a row, you're going to move up huge amounts in the standings because your price per million is going to return at a different rate. And ultimately, if you look at the best players in the world, they rate every player on a rating scale based on the amount of points per million they spend on them. And it's not about their per million that they're worth, it's per million that they take up in their roster at the time. So it's an interesting way to actually crunch the numbers and figure out where your money is best spent. And it's why, honestly, if you ask me for the fantasy player of the year, it's not Erling Haaland, it's actually Harry Kane. Because for the money spent and for the actual consistent measure and the average he gave, he actually added more returns over the whole season than Haaland. So more consistently, if you captained him every week, you'd actually get a higher score with Harry Kane this year than you would have with Haaland. So for me, Harry Kane was the best Premier League player in fantasy. And honestly, as much as I love Mo, Harry Kane has probably been the best fantasy asset in the game since I started playing it about 10 years ago.
Yeah, I would agree with all of that. I think one name I just want to touch upon really quick was Odegaard, because at the start of the season, we all agreed how fantastic of a player he is, but as a fantasy asset, he didn't really come up to the forefront because he was the pass before the pass. He was the pass before the assist. And he really, really just completely turned into a new beast this year. And I've been a fan of Odegaard for a while now. I'm bummed he's at Arsenal, but it was nice to see what he was able to do with a bit more freedom, with a bit more space.
I think you have to be careful with him though as a player, because I think as they get better and as they morph into a bigger attacking beast and have more players, I could see him being asked to drop deeper, more like Kevin De Bruyne is asked to do at times. And I see some of his fantasy numbers decreasing, and that's another one on this screen. It's not on right now, but I know he's slightly down the list. I think you will see a decline. We have seen a decline in Kevin De Bruyne scoring for the last 4 or 5 years in fantasy, and I believe it will continue, because I think that as Alvarez gets more and more comfortable playing in the role, and I think takes a bigger role next year. And the other thing is Phil Foden is naturally moving more and more towards Kevin De Bruyne's prime position at playing behind the striker. Eventually, that's going to be Phil Foden's job. So I think we're going to see less of De Bruyne as the top-end playmaker for City. And with Haaland there, Alvarez there, and then you add in the rest of the attacking players, I think Kevin De Bruyne's kind of days as like a high-end fantasy asset are probably coming to an end.
Yeah. Well, let's take a look at kind of seeing where we all finished here, kind of briefly go over how we felt about our team at the end of the day. Where is Scally's team?
He's probably still looking for a player to score 8 points.
So, rough end to the year for you. Dropped out of the top 150,000, right?
I was 175. I was hoping to get into the top 50 or so. Yeah, I had obviously a tough week, with only 28 points. I'm not overly upset with the moves. In hindsight, do I wish that I had just kept Martinelli on the bench and not brought in Eze without scoring and gone Haaland to Kane and captain? Of course I do, right? I thought Haaland would play. I'm not going to lie. They had a week off. He hadn't played in a week. He hasn't played much football. They got a big match in the FA Cup on Saturday, and then they got the Champions League final the week after, right? I thought he would get 60 minutes, and that would be enough to bag 2 goals. I didn't captain him in case of it. It didn't help me with Mo. And, it's just a really poor week with Newcastle didn't really show up for me. Brighton players didn't really show up for me. So just wasn't my best showing on the way out. But, I moved up 400,000 spots in the last 8 weeks. I made a valiant run at moving as high up as I could after a bad middle stretch there. So, you learn from it. We get ready for next season.
Absolutely. And then as far as finishes overall, percentage-wise, I imagine this is one of your better years in the last 9
Yeah,
year? When you
I-
look at it, percentage of the amount of players and not just your overall finish.
Yeah, I think so. I mean, I had the back-to-back years of like 11,000 and 13,000 in the world, and there was like 6 to 7 million. It's still a pretty high stretch there for percentage wise. There we go. So yeah, the last couple of years have been rough. Obviously, I've been consistently, as you can see, somewhere in the top 20, top 200,000 almost the entire time I've been playing. Believe it or not, 2 seasons ago was my worst there at what, 316.
Yeah, that's crazy.
I'm a consistent person. In my first year I was in the top 100,000 and I was pissed because I thought like I did terrible, and people are like, that's not that bad actually. Nowadays people, that's like a goal. But the game has risen a lot. I think 15, 16 there might have only been 3-4 million people playing the game at that time. So the game's just getting crazy. It should be even nuttier next year. So I enjoy it. I just like looking at the scores and seeing the difference. I had 2371 in 1819. It got me 13,000 in the world. This year I had 2471 and I'm 152,000.
Yeah.
2 years ago I'm 100. It's crazy. And this year 2471 wouldn't have got you anywhere near to sniff.
Right.
Yeah.
So, yeah, a couple bad years there, but I'll be back on it. My plan next year is to get in like inside the top 10,000, try to like take a run at finding myself into like one of those big leagues for money.
But I'm with you next year, Gally. No hits. I
It's the most
want
important.
to take no hits next year.
It's the most important thing. If you can do it, I mean, you got to take them sometimes, and it's about setting up a move. Like I've told Mateusz before, I don't think wild cards and I don't think chips should be used. I think like they should be planned. So like, if you're going to use a bench boost, like you should, hey, wild card 2 weeks before, or you should. Somehow we just transformed into PTI or something. I was waiting for Stephen A. Smith, Screaming A. Smith, to start yelling at me. You don't know shit about fantasy.
Fuck them Cowboys.
So no, the hits hurt. The hits hurt. The captaincies hurt, and it's using the chips, right? It's like I know people that use the triple captains, and they got 6 points with like a dud Holland blank, and I threw out. I picked a week and I did it, and I got 20 out of Rashford, and it was a 60-point swing. Like those are enormous moves. I mean, somebody triple captain that week that Bobby got 23 points. Like those are the type of moves that change everything. No one else does it, and you're 80, 90 points high. So got to use those, and don't overvalue the double game weeks. They're overinflated. People make 4 transfers to get 5 guys with doubles and move out 3 players who had better individual matchups and had a home match against Leeds. And it's like, wait, I just got rid of Harry Kane to bring in Dominic fucking Solanke because Bournemouth's got 2 matches this week. It's like, it'd take Bournemouth fucking 5 hours to score as many goals as Kane could get in 1/2 against Everton at home.
I took a -8 to bring in Ben Mee.
Yeah, exactly. That's exactly it. I went with a Brentford double up, and they gave up a dirty goal in the 85th minute back-to-back weeks. And I'm not salty because I did. I had Raya and me the same time. They both gave up meaningless goals.
I did not know.
Games.
I did not know. I did not want to reopen that wound.
You can't bring some things up like
3-1.
You can't let a Sadio Mane double. You don't want to bring that up either.
But you can't bring up forgetting to lock in the bench boost with me and Mateusz as well.
Oh, yes.
I had to use it on the
So
last week.
Speaking of forgetting the bench boost and hits, we move over to Trevor's team for the last week here.
Oh, look at this fine mess.
So what were the moves that you did here? Do you remember what the -4 was?
Yeah, so I'll pull it up because I have it on my phone as well. And what I got rid of the corpse of Luke Shaw and who else? And Pope and Nick Pope to bring in De Gea, which ended up
fine,
doing okay. And who was the other guy I brought in? Which was not fine. I think I brought in Gabriel, which was all right, but the rest of my team got pep rouletted and And from there was not much in the way of joy from taking a -4 with a bench boost and falling out of the top million.
And that's okay. It's all about. I mean, did you have fun this year?
Oh, I had a blast.
Okay,
But it was one of those things where I was at that point where I go, or I think, and we were talking about it last time I was on. I'm like, yeah, I'm finding my stride, and then I brought in Wilson too late. I did a wild card that completely imploded, and just everything from there went off a cliff. And here we are, staring at a team that. And you brought up Odegaard. He is the only guy that has been on my team from the first week to the final week.
Oh wow! I don't know if I think maybe only Trippier in my case could be the only guy I had from week 1. I think that might and Martinelli. I think those are the only two. I might have transferred out on Martinelli. Honestly, I don't know. I think Trippier for sure. But Trippier was great all year.
I don't want to bring up Trevor though because he started the year on my bench because I wasn't sure about Newcastle.
Yeah,
but Odegaard is the only guy that stayed in my starting lineup from the beginning to the end.
you definitely received the fruits from that labor for sure. Alan here, for what it's worth, my team in the Facebook Predictions League just happened to win for the second year in a row. We were virgins last year, but this year we were brilliant. Congratulations to you and your team. And we are looking forward to see if you can make it 3 in a row like City next year. I don't know if I should say that, but yeah, it is what it is at this point. So who knew that we were actually the Farmers League all along? So what we're looking at here now, I actually didn't realize, Trevor, I might have brought this up before. Oops, I was about to leave the studio and just collapse everything on you guys. Really leave you stranded. You are also somewhat of a veteran yourself because you've been in for about 10 years too, or 9-ish years. So I think you and Gally started roughly around the same time. Now that I see it,
I think he's got me by a couple of years.
Yeah, and a couple of those years are ones where I gave up at a certain point, but the ones that I really put the work in, and well, looking back, I remember 14-15 one is one I did put a lot of work in, and I kind of ended up like I did this year, where it didn't do anything. Every chip I used completely crapped itself. Every time I had a double game week because of the FA Cup, I botched it, and that's kind of how this year went. It was one of those things where you put a little bit of effort in, and all your risks hit. You can kind of get good results, but that was not the case for me this year, especially in these past 5 weeks.
Well, it is what it is. You live and you learn, and that's kind of how.
Yeah, that's what you got to do.
That's been the theme of all the fantasy. It's just you play to have fun. You're not always gonna be making the right decisions. It's at the end of the day, there's a little bit of luck involved. I know, especially with the captain choices. There was an article that came out about the winner of this year, and his captaincy choices is really what gave him the win, is because he was able to pick the right captain. Like 30 out of the 38 weeks, he picked the highest scoring player, and that sort of stuff, like Gally, you were mentioning before. That is ultimately what's going to win you your leagues, win you your cups, win you the whole thing. Is if you make those correct choices. Because if you are consistently doubling up the highest scorer every week, you'd have to pretty much put out a pretty bad lineup to not be able to compete with everyone else.
Yeah, you just put yourself in such a good spot, and you're just stacking the rankings because ultimately you can't beat scores that aren't available, right? Like you can only get so high. There's a max score every week, and the goal is to get as close to it. And the first way you do that is making sure that you're getting double for at least the highest of your team. I think in those years I did really, really well. Were seasons where I didn't always have the best scorer, but I literally would only have like 3 or 4 times all season long, 5 times maybe tops, where someone on my team outscored my captain. And that's just going to give you green arrows consistently, and in turn make your team have higher valued players that will earn more money, that allow you to then, put more in the bank. So when you use said wild card, you're using a bigger budget. And, that's how the top leagues and the top teams, they pay attention to the price raises. They pay attention and make moves. I'm not a big fan of playing the money game. I think there's real value in building squad value, but I think following it and trying to make moves and read the tea leaves is a sketchy thing, especially when it takes earning 0.2 to get 0.1 in the bank. And I think that's one of the types of changes they should make. Like, I think they should either make money more important, how you manage it, by having price raises and falls that actually make more of a move. I also think they should change some rules, like either allowing you to bank maybe up to 3 total transfers so that you can carry over 2 game week transfers into a beginning of another week. I wouldn't mind seeing that move. And then I think there's also some like serious talk and ideas around like the pricing of players. Like, I think you have to either up prices or do the real drastic and possibly even drop down to not allowing more than 2 players from any one team. And I think that would really freaking Yahtzee the game on its head. Because now you're making real decisions like, do I want Trent, Gakpo, and Mo, or Mo and Diaz, or, Holland and X? And now all of a sudden there's reason and logical reasons not to have Holland in your side.
And another argument I saw, in that vein is you could have 3 people from a team, but not multiple on the same line.
Right, exactly. Or even 3, but
like
not
a defense going against a bum team. Yeah,
and that's another one where you could have basically one keeper. So you can't do the double up for the 2 $4 million starters from Leicester to start the year because you want to go cheap at keeper. And how did that work for everybody? How'd that work for you, Mateusz? What did the 1 million say about the Iverson Ward combo for 12 weeks?
Danny Ward's going to be playing in Uzbekistan next year.
Yeah, he won't. He definitely won't be playing in the Premier League as a starter. That's for sure. But I think that has some merit in it too. Like, get rid of the Newcastle double up. You can have one of Bruno Fernandes or Rashford, but you're not having both. You can have one of De Bruyne and Foden, but so then too you can't be going bargain basement on a player and then loading up on another. It's an interesting way to look at it. On the other hand, it sounds like sour grapes because people figured out ways to like manipulate numbers and maximize rosters, and that's what the game's supposed to be about. It's supposed to be a game of Football Manager, so it's supposed to be for fun too, and I think that's the problem. The more rules they put into it, it's kind of the fun they're taking out of it. So it'll be a balance. It'll be interesting for me. I'll tell you what, I can use a couple months off. That's for sure.
I think, and this if Paul was watching, this would warm his heart, his cold heart. If we could just not have a lockout and just have rolling transfers throughout the weekend, I think that would drastically improve the game, because then you're actually making real decisions and you're taking out all of the guesswork. If you want to save your transfer because you want to see who's going to start in Pep's match on Sunday, then you save that transfer and you make the necessary moves then. I think this is just me coming from playing fantasy MLS this year. Cue all the laughter from everyone else. But they do rolling lockouts, like rolling transfers, and it is the nicest thing of any fantasy sport that I've played, because
Fantasy Champions League does the same thing.
Does it? Okay, yeah, and it opens the game up a bit more, and obviously, like, you might have to pay more attention sometimes, but other than that, it just opens the game up. It lets you feel a little bit more easy. It also allows for people like us, because let's be honest, a lot of fantasy players are from the States. So to have people needing to wake up at 3:30, 4:30 in the morning to check lineups, to set their lineups, is kind of absurd. And people will do that because they want to do that.
Or Friday while you're at work.
Right? Something like that. So I think just being able to open the game up by allowing you to make changes after the first game, it doesn't have to be that serious either. Like, okay, you have until like this time each day to make the lineup. You don't have to wait till you get the lineup for the 12:30 kickoff match. You have, let's say, till 9 a.m. Central Time, because I'm using Central Time here, to make your necessary changes, and then they lock for the day. So I think just making that little move could open the game up.
It could be a good idea. I think the concept that they've always hung on is this is how their game works, and this is part of the actual strategy of the game. Is
But that's
like,
just guesswork, though. It's not really strategy.
is
right?
it guesswork? Is it guesswork when the top 100,000 players in the world basically start on average, like have on average 13 and a half to 14 starting players in their side every week? Like, it's not really guesswork when guys that are big players rotate guys because they're actually paying attention to trends and watching. And, you know, I understand what you're saying, but they give you the sub. So again, if you set your teams up right, what people hate is Riyad Mahrez isn't starting today. But if you're locked out at 9 a.m. that day, you're not getting Riyad Mahrez, a guarantee on Riyad Mahrez's start anyways. So
but at least gives you a chance to see what happened with the first couple of matches. Maybe you make a decision from there. You go, okay, this person scored more points than I anticipated. Let me take a punt on someone else instead of Mahrez, right? Just in case he doesn't start.
Yeah, you can definitely make that move if you have the ability to make the transfers.
Yeah.
And I think it just makes, I mean, you know, we complain about these servers with 12 million people. You know, imagine live systems where it has to lock out every player who's already started a match that week. Like, these guys can't get me in. These guys can't get me in an hour before a match when they're just trying to update who I'm playing in a head-to-head league, for Christ's sake.
Yeah, I get it. And maybe it doesn't have to be that dramatic. Maybe we implement the one player who scored highest on your bench, if you need a sub, goes in, rather than tiering who would be the first sub. You know, maybe just a small change like that could open it up too, because then you're not you're less limited on how you set those up. But
sounds like someone got burned with like Almiron for a 17 third on his bench when some guy got a freaking, when Milner came in and got a 2-minute 0 for his appearance in yellow.
Curtis Jones.
Yeah, Curtis Jones.
I got Jones in the 3 spot when he scored twice.
Well, honestly, you probably deserve a laughing and a little bit of a fucking verbal banter just for having Curtis Jones at any point on your fantasy team. Because if you're going to have a guy like Curtis Jones on your team, he should be starting, enabling you to have like 4 premiums. Because, I mean, come on. You got Curtis Jones on your team, you're just wasting a Liverpool spot sitting on your bench. And it's fucking Curtis Jones.
So, Trevor, going to you, if there was one change that you would make, if you think there needs to be a change made to the game, where do you lean?
I don't want it to be like rolling day to day, like by like hour to hour, but I think Saturday games lock, Sunday games lock, Monday games lock, Friday when those fucking abominations happen, lock. That would be the one where you can kind of look at what you're at after each day with still the necessary point hits. If you're making those changes, that'd be the biggest one, because there's sometimes where you kind of just forget, you being me, and you're kind of just screwed for the entire weekend. Whereas, okay, I lose James Ward-Prowse on Friday, but I can still work through the rest of the weekend if I see fit. And if, like you said, Saturday doesn't go as I planned, I can take that -4 on Sunday and bring some guys in that I think would help save my weekend.
Yeah. And that depends too, because then you have a whole conversation of, okay, well, when do the chips lock? Do they lock that Friday? Do they lock that Saturday? Because there's some chips that would give you a big advantage to lock later after information, obviously. And there's others where it wouldn't really matter when you lock it. You just kind of have to do it before the game, no matter what. So I'm sure nothing's going to change. If anything's going to change, it's going to be close to the price of players, like Gally mentioned, is that they're going to do something a little 100%. Bit more extreme where it limits you one way or another, because having the formium, as they were saying this year, was elite. It seemed like having you could do all of Salah, Kane, Holland, and Trippier, and then still form enough of a formidable side elsewhere to be just fine for the whole year.
Yeah, there's definitely gonna be a meeting in the middle.
Yeah, I think it starts with Holland probably being priced at $15 million to start.
Yeah, and I think we talked about that earlier in the season. Is Holland next year is probably going to be the highest starting fantasy asset in the history of the game.
Yeah, and I also think that they're going to move. I think they'll finally make the move and move Mo to a striker, which changes everything, because as soon as you classify Mo as a striker, you lose the points, you lose the clean sheet points, and you lose the point on all goals. But more importantly, you also cut yourself down to, like, you're never going to have Kane, Salah, and Holland.
We have Kane, Holland, and Mo.
If Kane's still in the Premier League by then, at this point next year, seeing that Benzema's leaving Real Madrid, and I don't know where Real Madrid's going to spend their money. And honestly, there isn't a better striker in the world to buy right now Osimhen is a better young option and a better investment.
I think he's going to end up at Bayern Munich.
Kane's the best striker you could buy in the world. I will stand by my points. I've said it all along. If Harry Kane were on Manchester City this year, he would have scored more goals. He would have a higher goals and assists total than Holland put together. And it's not a shot at Holland. I just think he's a complete football player, and he plays into that type of system. And if you put him in the Madrid system with that midfield and Harry Kane dropping into it and Vinny Jr. running off, we thought it was special when he was setting up Son. Imagine what he'll do with Vinny Jr. running on the left of him. I honestly think he'll win everything. Like, it'll be nothing, and all we'll be able to do then is just make fun of him for breathing through his mouth and being dumb enough to have his brother as his agent.
Sounded like a mopper.
Well, you can sound like a Muppet. You can sound like a Muppet if you wearing that friggin' lily whites in Madrid. It's wearing the lily whites in fucking London that you can't get away with that shit.
Very much so. Very, very much so.
So I think the fantasy league will be shaken up. And I think the other thing you have to look at is I think the incoming assets is always a huge deal. Like, where the players will go, who's Newcastle going to sign, which of these players will step forward next year, which of these players will get super inflated price tags, So
speaking of that, I just had one kind of question that would around that, and then we can kind of wrap things up a little bit. Alexis McAllister coming over to Liverpool obviously was super cheap this year. If he comes to Liverpool, sorry, I didn't mean to make that official yet. This is kind of going back to the inflation of the price. Where do you see him at if he does make the transfer to Liverpool, or let's say he makes the transfer to any bigger club, right? Is he at 7.5? Is he at 8?
7. He'll be 7 to 7.5. I think, no matter where he is. I think he would have been that at Brighton. I think Matoma will be that 6.5 to 7 price range, and I think that's where McAllister will probably start. I think he's a feasible asset in the Liverpool midfield because I think he walks into the midfield and starts day one. I don't think you spend that kind of money on a player and not expect him to start. I think he starts over Thiago immediately. So for me, I think McAllister is a decent shout and gamble. If I were looking at players moving around the Premier League, though, I think McAllister probably wouldn't be the first one I'd be looking at. I think there might be better options eventually.
Oh, I'm sure. And silly season has just begun, so who knows what we're in for the next 3 months or 2.5, whatever the case might be. So as we bid adieu on this season, gentlemen, thank you very much for joining me. Any last words from either one of you as far as fantasy goes, as far as anything goes? The floor is yours.
You get a month and a half to 2 months off, and that's about it. They'll start putting rankings out in late July, early August when preseason happens. The best thing you can do as soon as the game starts is put a team together and then slowly tweak it throughout the entire preseason right up to the last day. People who wait till the last minute, pick 3 players and hit autofill, they end up with a bunch of $7 million guys and you have no squad rotation. Build a squad based on numbers. It's not about players. You can move the parts around. You can't recreate those pieces. So pick 2 4.5s, pick a 4, get a keeper that you like, have some principles, have a budget, and have fun. Like we take it kind of seriously here, but the most important thing to really do is have fun. So get in a good league, get in one with banter, and don't let someone like Mateusz win, especially if he's just going to freaking whine about it all year long. Go, BJ.
Whine about
Team trivia.
I was top of the league the whole goddamn year. Trevor, anything from you?
No, I feel your Arsenal-ish pain, and I agree with Gally. Put a team together early and look at it and kind of give yourself a couple permutations before you put that final squad together. The big thing, don't give yourself anybody from Luton because they are going to be the possibly worst team in Premier League history, and you don't want to give yourself Leeds-ish defensive returns for the first 3 weeks.
I can't
Don't
wait.
Put yourself through that.
I can't wait for that to be so incorrect. I don't think they'll be good, but I don't think they'll be the worst in Premier League history. I think there might be one decent asset to take a punt on every few weeks.
There'll always be decent assets, but I will say I looked over the squads, and these are some weak-ass teams coming up when it comes to fantasy, like actual fantasy things that you'd want to invest in. Like even the Burnley team that played much better football. Sheffield United's coming back with a similar side, but they're the same jamokes that went down 2 years ago.
Yeah, Sheffield's like Norwich.
So I think it's interesting. I will say to the Luton comments, I thought Bournemouth had a chance to be one of the worst Premier League sides I've ever seen in my life. And it would have taken a big, big bet to get me. You would have to give me big, big odds to place a bet that all three of the Premier League teams that got promoted would stave off relegation this year. And for the fact that all three of them not only stayed up, but were safe with a week to go, it's kind of shocking. So it'll be interesting next year to see what Bournemouth does, what Forest does. Does Forest buy another 35 players? Do they actually allow 20 of the 35 they bought this year to bet in? Do they figure out a way to play with 8 fullbacks at once on a pitch and still score? It will be interesting. But, you got Forest. I think Fulham is in a different class at this point, as long as they're able to hold on to Mitrovic and maybe he doesn't get suspended for 30 games next season. These are all things that would probably bode well. But we all know that there's a good chance that none of those things will happen. So, you know what? We get a couple months off, but we'll be back next year. We're going to have a little different format. We may try to switch it up a bit with how we do the show, maybe get more interactive with listeners and viewers, but we'll try to figure that out over the summer. And thank you for everyone who's watched, commented, or liked throughout the year. Don't forget to go subscribe to the YouTube channel so you have a chance to win that beautiful red jersey.
That's
get in the Discord so you can get in the league.
Exactly. And
so you can beat me in the first round.
Those are all my words covered. Take all the necessary mental breaks you guys need from this game. Come back fresh after the summer. Have some fun. We'll see you guys then. From all of us here at ASTV Fantasy Show, have a wonderful summer. See you next year.